Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the interesting artistic side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, it's been a quiet one, it's been a pleasant one. I've been power washing for my life. I finally finished PowerWash Simulator just this morning after playing through all of the levels that just grow in scale so much, from power washing just like a small, area or a car or a bike, up to power washing huge structures or interiors or vehicles. And I was never expecting to get that addicted to a game about power washing, where you're just spraying away the dirt using a variety of high-pressure hose pipes. But what do you know? It was just a very addictive game. I think I was talking to someone on Twitter about this, and I think that there is something about clearing away dirt that just appeals to a certain type of psychology. It's like tidying for satisfaction, and that game just really hit the spot for me. I had a lot of fun doing it. I was playing after work just to unwind and relax my mind, and it really hit the spot. So I can thoroughly recommend it, PowerWash Simulator. It's on Game Pass. I'm kind of hoping that they do some DLC at some point. There's like a funny little story to the game that I wasn't quite expecting, where you're slowly power washing like a series of objects that belong to different people in a town, and they text you as you're washing and tell you their story. Like, this vehicle used to belong to me and my husband when we were just married, and we went across America in this camper van, and things like that. And you just get like little slices of story about the mayor and about the life of the town as you're playing, and it just adds a nice little plot to the thing, just to keep you interested. I think I would have liked it anyway, and I would have been interested enough just in cleaning. But it did actually lead up to quite a nice little finale, I would say, where some things were revealed about the town slowly through the washing that you were doing. And other than that, I've really just been playing Cult of the Lamb. I talked about it briefly last week. I said that I had planned to review it, but that I'd experienced a couple big bugs, and so my playthrough had just taken a little bit longer than I expected. But I've finished that game now, and I have got my notes here, and there's a lot to say about Cult of the Lamb. I've got quite a long set of notes here, and I'm looking forward to digging into Cult of the Lamb, the highs, the lows, the bugs, the personality, the combat, the village building, and the crashes, and the characters. And so I'm going to be talking about Cult of the Lamb today. Going to give that one a full review. And there is going to be some music from Cult of the Lamb sprinkled throughout the podcast, because it has a really, really nice soundtrack, among many other good qualities. But before I get to that game, I thought I would just talk through a couple new games that have arrived. I had a couple review codes that came in just at the last minute, so my list of games to review has grown. There are some really interesting ones. I got a code for Steve Jackson's Sorcery, and I don't know if any of you guys are old enough or nerdy enough to have played those Steve Jackson Choose Your Own Adventure books, but I played an awful lot of them as a kid. I went through the entire series pretty much. I think I took them out from the library. I used to spend my pocket money on them. Choose Your Own Adventure books, where it says turn to page 32 if you want to do this, turn to page 64 if you want to do that. And so it's like a one-person role-playing fiction game. And I spent a lot of time with these. I can still visualize some of the covers of those books, especially the one for Death Trap Dungeon, which was my favorite. And so it's really interesting that role-playing book format has been brought over into a video game. I'm quite curious to see what they've done with that format. I heard on the So Video Games podcast that Brad Galloway was a big fan of this one, and that was enough for me to seek it out alongside my interest in Steve Jackson's books and my nostalgia for them as a kid. So I'm adding that one to the slate. I also got a code for We Are OFK. You've probably heard about this one. There's been quite a big push on it. It's a visual novel with a very cool, pleasant, breezy graphic style. And it's about a fictional band, I guess, called OFK. And it looks like an animated series. And I watched the trailer for this one, and I've been intrigued by it. I have got a place in my heart for a really mellow visual novel of the type, like Coffee Talk, I guess, would be another example of that, where you're experiencing a piece of interactive fiction. You are making minimal choices and just experiencing a story through some easy, pleasant gameplay. It's like reading just a very breezy book with a nice art style attached to it, with a little bit of choice. And I like the look of We Are OFK. It looks like quite a fresh one. It's got like a Sayonara Wild Hearts type of look to it, mixed with this nice soundtrack, because the band OFK, which I keep thinking is AFK. I keep thinking it's We Are Away from Keyboard every time I see the name of this game. But it's We Are OFK, and the band makes a really nice, soft, synth pop kind of music. And so I'm going to guess that you're doing things like going on tour, being in the studio, doing concerts together, and that kind of thing. And I'm really looking forward to settling down with We Are OFK. And I've also been this isn't a game that I have, but it's a game that I've wanted to play. This time last year, I think on like mid-September, is when Deathloop came out on the PlayStation. And I was curious about it, but not enough to buy it. It's a little bit of a Ghost of Tsushima for me. It's a game that reviewed very well and looks very interesting, but that I'm not 100% sure is my kind of game. And so I didn't want to drop that full price on the game. But it went on to win an awful lot of Game of the Year awards. It won big at the Game Awards. It looks like it has a very cool visual style. There's some innovative mechanics in there. And it's an interesting one. So now that it's been a year since it came out on PlayStation exclusively, it is a Bethesda-published game, and obviously, famously, Microsoft and Xbox bought Bethesda for a huge amount of money. And so now that 1 year exclusivity, or presumed 1 year exclusivity, is coming up, I'm wondering if Deathloop is coming to Game Pass. I've been kind of watching my calendar, thinking, it might be time that Deathloop lands on Game Pass, and I'll finally get to give that one a go. I did notice that it dropped down in price on PlayStation from £60 to £20, and that's something that they often do right before the game loses exclusivity, to try and shake those last few sales out of a title that's done well. So I'll be keeping an eye out in the next month to see if Deathloop lands on Xbox, and if so, it might finally be time to jump into that one. And before we jump into this week's featured review, allow me to mention that this show is patron-supported. I have a nice community of patrons, all of whom signed up at patreon.com/gaminginthewild for as little as $1 a month, or €1 or £1 or more if you would like to. And for that, you get access to the show's Discord server, where you can come and talk about games with other listeners, talk about what you're playing, etc., recommend games to be covered on the show, that kind of thing. You'll get occasional extra episodes, a couple a year, a few a year, about different things like video game music, books, film, off-topic stuff, or spoiler casts, that kind of thing. And if you're interested in joining that community and supporting this podcast, every patron is very much appreciated. I really enjoy the show of support, and I really love the community that has sprung up around the podcast. This week, there's been a lot of chat about Cursed to Golf. A lot of people seem to be playing that game, so that game is firmly on my radar. There's been a bit of talk about Rollerdrome, the roller skating, Tony Hawk with guns, cyberpunk future sports game. Everyone is talking about that. There is a demo of that, which I am planning to tuck into. It looks a little hard, to be honest, but I'm also quite interested. I love the Sable-esque art style. And there's also been some chat about the Life is Strange series. One of the show's patrons has just finished off that entire series. And so people have been rating the Life is Strange games and talking about that series. It's a fun time always in that Discord. Come and join us. Patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And with all of that said, let's move on to this week's featured game, Cult of the Lamb. So Cult of the Lamb is a 2022 game by Massive Monster, an Australian studio. It is their debut game. It is published by Devolver Digital, an ever-reliable source of super cool and interesting indie games. They rarely miss, and they don't miss here. It's available on the PS4 and the PS5, the Xbox, Switch, and Steam. And it has a great soundtrack by an artist called Riverboy. I've been really enjoying the music, actually. It's quite something. It's a really atmospheric soundtrack, really sets the game off. And when I was planning to play this game, I was really torn between whether to play it on a Switch or whether to play it on my PS5, because there is something very nice about a top-down, hand-drawn, dungeon-y kind of game on a handheld. It just feels good. It's the home of Zelda, that kind of thing. And it's the perfect kind of game for Switch, really. Switch isn't really the place for next-gen graphics or 3D environments, especially modern ones, but it is a great place for pixel art and a great place for voxel games and a great place for hand-drawn games like this one. But in the end, the art style is so lovely in this game, so crisp and colourful and lively. I thought it might be really nice to see this on a big 4K screen, so I bought it on PlayStation 5. It did not run particularly well, I have to say. It was glitching, it was hitching, it was crashing, and that's been the case across all formats, although people on PC seem to have been having the least of it. So if you're thinking of buying this game and you have that option, PC might be the place to play. Also, surprisingly, it's not on Game Pass, which feels like a big miss for Game Pass to me. It's had a dry month, and this would have been a great game for Game Pass. It's been a huge cult hit. And after the success of Stray over on PlayStation Plus, Cult of the Lamb on Game Pass would have been a really good one. It would have been a perfect fit. Especially as Devolver titles usually appear on Game Pass. It was a bit of a surprise, but perhaps justified because the game has passed 1 million sales in the first week, which is just a crazy amount of games to sell. It's been up at 50,000 plus concurrent players on Steam. It has taken over Twitter. People are just going nuts with this one. It's one of those ones that has established a whole fan art community in a matter of weeks. So Cult of the Lamb is doing very, very well. And the studio actually put out a tweet saying, "We are eternally grateful for your devotion, and our team is committed to improving the game with tweaks, fixes, and major content updates for free. This is only the beginning, as there's so much room for this cult to grow." So there we go. We can expect to see more Cult of the Lamb. Looks like there's some DLC coming. And this game must go down as one of the major indie hits of the year. Metacritic has it at 82 from 68 reviews. Some perfect scores, couple down at 5 out of 10. Some of the complaints were about length. Some of the complaints were about people feeling that the various systems of the game were patched together from other games. But the majority of reviews have been pretty positive, and it gets an 8 out of 10 from players too, which is a pretty decent score if you ask me. How Long to Beat has the game at 13 hours for the story, 16.5 for extras, and 21 for completionists. I think I came in at over 20 hours, but I did have a progress ending bug that meant I had to replay a segment of the game. So I think I probably spent about 16 on it and had to replay 4 hours. I'll go into that in more detail later in the review. And the devs described this game as, "Start your own cult in a land of false prophets, venturing out into diverse and mysterious regions to build a loyal community of woodland followers and spread your word to become the one true cult." And I have to say about this one in summary, it's a devilishly cute indie game that mashes slick and speedy roguelike dungeon runs with a village building cult simulator. It's riddled with game-breaking bugs, but its charm and snappy gameplay win through. And this is a really fun little indie game. I had a lot of fun with this one. I love it when a nice, polished indie game will just come out and live up to expectations and just take over your life, your gaming life, for just a short while and really hit that spot. There's only a few games a year that do it, and I do think that this is one of those games, even though it has its fair share of problems, which I will be going into throughout the review. This is definitely one of those indie games that will really stand out, and one of the ones that I'll really remember from this year. It really sucks you in right from the off. I think not least because of the visual style. As I've described, it's line drawn. It looks great. It's got these nice children's book style illustrations with different types of animals, different kind of structures, tents and trees, and the different areas that you're running through. All of the enemies that you fight against are really cute. They're colourful, they're nicely animated. It reminds me a little bit of the style of Hollow Knight, except if it was really pumped up into Technicolor and not quite as desaturated as that game is, but it's the same style of animation, if that gives you like a visual reference point. And in this game, you play a small, cute lamb who is brought back from the dead after being sacrificed. And they're brought back by the One Who Waits. And this is a sinister god that is trapped in a white purgatory, waiting to make their comeback. And they've been chained up there with a couple of their followers. And you have an audience with them at the moment of your death. And they say, go back, start a cult in my name, take revenge on my 4 siblings who put me here and chained me up, and free me back into the world. And so the game is basically a quest to take down 4 other gods to bring back the One Who Waits. And you have to do this by starting a cult for them, by building up the followers, by building up the follower numbers, and by going on combat runs to take them down. And the game is split into 2 main elements, and it's quite an unusual combo and quite ingenious. It's a little bit in spirit like the kind of combination of Pyre, which mixes together a visual novel with a strange sports game. It's a combo that shouldn't work but really does. This one mixes together the 2 elements of a vaguely roguelike dungeon crawler and a village builder. So those are the 2 different types of gameplay that you're going to be engaging in. First of all, between runs, you can build up your camp. This means building things for your followers and making their lives more pleasant so they don't get pissed off with you and leave and that kind of thing. And then when everything's going well in the camp, you dive into some dungeons. And when I say dungeons, I'm using the term loosely, really. They're not like stone underground dungeons in the traditional Zelda sense, not aesthetically dungeons, but they are a series of rooms where you fight enemies. There are several levels that you go through on each run. There are bosses at the end. There are chests to open. There are boons and bonuses to get, different weapons that you can use, story unlocks, and all of those kind of things that we expect from a roguelike dungeon crawler. So even if it's not specifically set in dungeons, I'm going to refer to these areas as dungeons. I noticed that they're referred to as regions in the game's description there at the beginning. And they are quite interesting and diverse. There is an Anchor Deep, which is an oceanic one. There is Tanglewood, which is like a dark forest. So they all have their own personality, and I really enjoyed graduating from one to the next and wondering what the next set of dungeons or regions would look like and be like. There's different enemies in each one, and it is roguelike in that if you die during a run, you wake up back at your camp. There is no real penalty for it, which is something that I really liked about this game. You'll lose a little bit of your loot, but you get to keep most of it. It's just a small deduction if you die. And you just get very quickly whipped back to the camp to spend that on building, to check in on your followers, and to do that side of the game. And in that sense, I would say this combination is a little bit like, in feel, Hades, actually. Hades being the roguelike dungeon crawler where you have the House of Hades, where the gods live at the bottom of the underworld, where you're processing the dead and things like that. And between each combat run, where you're slicing and dicing, getting all your power-ups and that kind of thing, there are story elements that unfold in this really cool hub area. And in Hades, this was a little bit of a breakthrough for the genre, I would say. There has always been a conversation about roguelikes, how much carries over from run to run, whether the meta game allows for progress, where your character gets more powerful, for a story to unfold and that kind of thing. And Hades really did the most that any roguelike has done to make you feel like you were taking part in a story. There were narrative reasons for you repeating the same dungeons again and again and again as you tried to break out of the underworld. There was always new dialogue for you when you got back to the House of Hades, and it gave the whole thing a really holistic, pleasant feel that made you feel like you were progressing and learning all of the time. And I guess Cult of the Lamb is a little similar, but rather than it being the House of Hades, where there's just a couple of people to chat to and then you go on and run again, here it's a whole other game. It is this village builder And it works really well. It was very, very engaging, and I really enjoyed the counterpoint, the contrast of these two types of game being thrown together. It made for a very engaging time. And after every fast and furious dungeon run, you come back, whether successful or whether having been taken down by an enemy or a boss, and you arrive back at your camp and suddenly you're building tents and growing vegetables and getting involved in this really cozy little other half of the game, and it just works very well. And the village building part of this game, it's a really a good little version of this kind of game. You start off in your cult compound, and I think you just have one follower, and you're taught that you have to make them somewhere to sleep. You have a stove. It teaches you how to use the interface where you go to your planning desk to build structures, and you can build a cooking stove, and then you can go and pick some ingredients, some plants. You can chop down trees, you can chip away at boulders that are in the compound area, and you need those resources to build, and you need those ingredients to cook. And that's the start of it all, really. If you've played a game like Animal Crossing or like a village sim or like a little village builder where you're building lots of different stuff and you have to juggle resources, you'll feel at home in this game straight away. And in this game, it's more than the House of Hades. This is actually a game that will probably take up as much or more time as the dungeon runs themselves, and it gets quite complex in a way that I really liked. And the way that it works is that there is a statue of the lamb at the center of the cult compound, and there's a little set of straw mats around this, and when you have enough followers, they will kneel at the statue and they will pray to the statue, as long as you're in their good books, you can say. So you have satisfaction of your villagers to consider, and when they are in good spirits, they'll pray to you, they'll do tasks for you, they will you can automate some of the workflows in this game. So for example, you can eventually promote them so that they are chipping down timber in the timber yard, they are collecting rock for you, they are working on refining metal for you to make more advanced materials, to build more advanced structures. But the ones that don't have a busy work task, and you can assign them to anything, will sit and pray at the statue. The statue has a meter on it, and when it is full of devotion, you can extract all of that devotion, and flames lick into the lamb's eyes, and it absorbs all of that faith and devotion. And when it hits a certain level, you will unlock the ability to get a new structure to build. And there are all kinds of cool structures. There are so many. I think there must be 30 plus different structures, from a prison to put re-educate followers that have lost their way because they were too hungry or because they didn't have a bed, and all of this dissatisfaction stuff that goes down in the game. So if you don't manage to keep your followers happy, they will start to rebel. If you don't keep the compound area clean by sweeping away their poop like a Tamagotchi, you'll find little piles, steaming piles all over the compound. You have to sweep them away, otherwise they'll get sick. And then of course, because there is a problem there is a solution built into the game, and as you unlock further structures, you can make a sick bay. But to make the sick bay run, you have to put a certain kind of flower petals in a jar, and then your followers can heal there, all that kind of thing. So there's all these interlocking systems where you're juggling resources, you're juggling the needs of your camp, you're trying to keep everyone happy, you're trying to keep the resources flowing so that you don't run out. You're doing little side quests for your followers. They might come over and ask you, could you go and get me 10 flowers from the dark woods? And if you bring back those flowers, then they will level up. And you can level your followers up. Every day you give a sermon in the temple, and the temple is another one of the main spots in your compound. You can deliver sermons, you can carry out rituals that will have status effects on your followers. For example, making them work through the night for 3 days, or making them all give you a hefty financial donation so that you can buy other stuff. All of this has an effect on the overall morale of your camp, which you can see at the top left on a gauge. If it's in the green, then all is well. If it gets down into yellow and into red, then you're going to start getting these dissenters. And dissenters will stand around the camp screaming at people, trying to talk about how you're a false prophet. And that shit spreads like wildfire. So you really do want to try and keep the camp happy, and it's quite a juggling act. It's a real balancing act to learn all of the systems and to prioritize correctly what needs to happen next. And if you're not careful, you can really paint yourself into a corner. If you find that you don't have enough food, then your followers will start dropping dead from hunger and they'll stop working. If you don't have enough events going on to amuse them, then they will just get pissed off with you, and then dissent will spread through the camp. And it is possible to go from having 10 happy followers working away to having 0, and then you just have a couple of days to go and find more. And if you don't, it's a game over. So you have to have a happy and growing cult. The follower numbers also matter, because to unlock the next dungeon, you'll need to have a certain amount of followers. I think you have to have 10 followers in order to unlock dungeon number 2. So there is a gameplay incentive to have a happy and thriving camp. You can't ignore one part of the game and just engage in the other. If you want to progress through the game, you're going to have to really balance those combat runs with that base building, village management sim game, the cult management sim. But it isn't all happy campers. This game has a massive dark side to it as well. For example, some of the rituals that you do involve brainwashing the entire camp, and their eyes just go blank, and they will work without any needs, without needing to be looked after for 3 days or something like that. So if you get into an emergency where your followers are starving but you have no food, or you have a huge resource shortage, or morale is very low, then you can brainwash your followers so that they stop caring. You can make them go on a fast, for example, and that will make them not eat for 3 days and give you some time to sort out your food situation. Or you can do something like marry one of your followers, and that will raise the morale of the camp. Or you can have a bonfire. There are all kinds of rituals that unlock. You're constantly racking up several different resources. As I've said, there's wood, rock, stone, gold. You collect the bones of enemies that you kill on dungeon runs, and that allows you to perform rituals. And there are various other currencies going on, such as the faith, and they all start to unlock buildings. They unlock further rituals. They unlock doctrine for your cult that enforces how they will behave, like the rules of your cult, that kind of thing. And so there is a lot happening in this part of the game. It's fully realized, fully fleshed out, very involved. And I had a great time with this part of the game, just as much as the combat. It was really, really a good, well-integrated pillar of the game, the cult simulator. I will say that it's very grindy, very resource-heavy, the kind of thing where you have to keep 10 plates spinning in your head, and you will know whether or not you like that kind of game. It did remind me a little bit of Witchwood, where it's like, okay, so I need to get a stick because I need a fishing pole, but then I'm also going to need some string to put on the pole. Then I need to do that because I have to catch a fish, because I need 10 scales, which I need to put onto this plank, and then I need 10 of those planks to, it's that kind of thing. It's like this ever-rolling series of jobs. And Witchwood was very much like that. It was resource collection, management, crafting, that kind of thing. And so I guess you'll know if that's your kind of game. But the other thing that sets this game apart from the Animal Crossings of this world is, of course, the combat. And I think that the combat in this game was the thing that maybe surprised me the most about it. I think maybe because of the way that it looks, and because most of the imagery and video that I'd seen about the game ahead of release was based on the more villagey elements of it, and talking to characters, managing your followers, managing your camp, building structures, that kind of thing. And I hadn't seen much of the combat, and I didn't have incredibly high hopes for it. I guess I was thinking along the lines of something like Moonlighter, where it's really all about the shop management sim, and the roguelike section is a little less sharp, a little less finished, a little less fully fleshed out. But I'm really happy to say that the combat in Cult of the Lamb is brilliant. It is slick, it is snappy, the controls feel good. You have a dodge roll, a strike, and a special attack. It's fast and furious, and what happens is you come into a room at the beginning of each region or dungeon. You get a randomly generated weapon. It's one of 4 different types. I think you can unlock a 5th. And as you unlock further weapons in the weapon tree through village activities, they will get special abilities, for example, poison or charge attack and that kind of thing. There's a slow weapon, which is like an axe, a very slow one, which is like a hammer, but that can one-hit people. There are fast daggers. There's a medium sword, and there is a slashing glove, which is a combo weapon with a build-up. As for the ranged ones, there's an explosion, an area effect that happens around you and pushes enemies away. Sometimes there is a projectile that you can aim. There is a projectile that goes in 4 directions, for example, tentacles that come up out of cracks in the ground and strike people in a cross around you. And when you're firing that one, you hold down a button and it slows down time so you can aim, then you let go to unleash it. You can't just spam the ranged attack though. It has a cooldown, and you have to get a pickup from slain enemies to recharge it and use it again. So there's a nice balance here between rewarding aggression to recharge your ranged weapon and hang back, a little bit like the Hyper Light Drifter style of combat. The dodge roll is very fast. In this game, rooms can be over in 10 seconds, or it can turn into more of a battle of attrition. Sometimes you get wave battles in each room, and as you progress through the dungeon, you will come into different rooms that are different every time because it's a roguelike. Sometimes in the rooms you'll meet a tarot reader who might give you pull a card for you, such as an extra health bar, or a status effect such as putting poison onto your weapon, or increasing the likelihood of better chests at the end of each room, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's just enemy rooms, and there are different types of enemies. There are ranged enemies, brutes, small fast ones, flying enemies. All of them have different attack patterns that you have to learn, and they get progressively harder through several floors of the dungeon, and then you fight a boss at the end. There's also a kind of a metagame to this part of it as well, in that each dungeon has 4 bosses, and you need to beat the first 3 to unlock the final boss door. So you have to run each dungeon at least 4 times to unlock that final boss door, when you'll face one of the bishops. That is one of the story bosses, the siblings of the one who waits, who have locked your overlord in that purgatory. And it does take a little bit of time and effort to get through these dungeons. It's not punishingly hard by any means. I played it on normal difficulty, and I think I could probably count the number of deaths that I had in the game on both hands on normal difficulty, so I was really breezing through it. But it was fast and furious. The runs were cool. It was really enjoyable, actually. So after you've done your village building, you go into the dungeon. There's like a little entrance area where you can see the 4 different dungeon doors. Then you have to unlock them one by killing the bishop of that dungeon. And so you open up these different dungeons, and it's very satisfying. I would say that dungeon runs can take anything from like 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more. I think maybe my longest run was 14 minutes or something like that. So that, again, that lends itself to a handheld. If you're playing on a Switch or a Steam Deck, it would be the perfect game for that. You can really pick up and play. And then if you die, or if you beat the boss, you get beamed back to your compound. You're picking up resources throughout the dungeon as well. There is a Slay the Spire style dungeon map where you can vaguely choose the next kind of room that you're going to face, whether you want to be in combat because you need enemy bones, whether you want to go to a shop and buy another tarot card. You unlock a whole deck of tarot cards that just offer a range of status effects that you pick up on your different runs. You can get resources, you can get increased health. So if you're on 1 heart and you see that there's a heart room, maybe you choose that one next to give yourself a better chance with the boss. Maybe you see a wood room or a crystal room. And each dungeon also has specific resources that you can only get there. For example, in Anchor Deep, there are crystal fragments that you need to build certain things. In one of the other ones, there is spider silk that you need to build certain things. So sometimes I actually dipped into dungeons just to go and resource farm a little bit. You can also rescue followers in dungeons. So you come into a room where there's a bunch of baddies and they are about to sacrifice a little rabbit or a little tortoise or a little hare or whatever it happens to be. If you defeat the baddies, you can whip that follower out of their predicament, beam them back to your village, and then when you get home, there is a new follower waiting to be indoctrinated into your cult. And so your cult can grow as you run through the dungeons, but then back at the camp, you have to unlock stronger weapons by fulfilling camp tasks. So it's very clever the way that the two halves of this game are woven together. They really do interdepend in a lot of different ways. The resources that you get in the dungeons are essential to carry out rituals back home, and the satisfaction of your followers is essential to power up your weapons for every dungeon run. So it's a really nice whole game, and I really like the way that they have managed to make these two games coexist perfectly. I will also mention that the dungeons are quite spectacular looking. This game has a day-night cycle, and by day, the dungeons are very colourful. They're very lush. There is lots of purple, there's lots of turquoise. It has a really vibrant palette, but at night, if it turns into night when you're in the dungeons, they seem to light up a little bit like, if you've seen The Nightmare Before Christmas, it's a little bit like the Oogie Boogie Man sequence, where neon colours just seem to leap out and the music intensifies. And the dungeon runs just look spectacular. It's such fast-flowing action. The arenas are just basic squares, and you unlock different rooms, you know. You go from room to room to room, defeat waves and waves and waves, up to the next level, do it again, pick up resources, get to the end, maybe get a follower, maybe take out a boss. If you kill a boss, you also get a follower. So you can return back to the camp with 3 new followers, and you're on your way to beating that dungeon, taking out the bishop. You have a whole bunch of new followers, all of whom need beds and meals and that sort of thing, and on it goes. But before I get on to talking about the upsides and downsides of this game and giving my final verdict on it, I do have to talk about the bugs. This is not something I usually do. If there's a couple bugs in a game, I'll usually mention them. I wouldn't normally give a whole little section to them, but in this case, this game is really, really buggy. I think maybe the last game I played that was quite as buggy as this was Sable, like a year ago, which launched with an awful lot of bugs in it, but was so charming that it just won me over. I persevered through the bugs. It was like a wide-ranging menu of bugs in every area of the game, and Cult of the Lamb at first didn't seem buggy. It's like it started off quite well. It seems like the opening sequence of the game is pretty clean, really, but the further that you get into the game, the more bugs occur, until I was seeing a bug like on every screen, and pretty much at every moment something was broken. So I do want to flag that up. I did a Twitter question recently where I asked people, how do you think critics should handle buggy games? Just because I was curious, do people want to know about, you know, do they want to assume that everything is going to be patched up and that this game is going to be in ship shape? And do they want to hear about that, or do they want to have like a litany of bugs listed out for them? And most people said they want to know about bugs just because it can inform whether they buy the game now, whether they wait and play it later, or maybe skip it and just keep an eye on the patches and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to give a little run through of a couple bugs here because they are pretty significant. Bugs can crash a game and maybe you lose a bit of progress, but sometimes you lose an entire save file in Cult of the Lamb, the way things stand. You can get soft locked in your compound. This means that for some reason the game has closed the exits of your compound until you complete a specific task. But if that task happens to be to build a scarecrow, and to build a scarecrow, you need a certain amount of woods. Let's say you need 10 logs or something like that. And you've chopped down all of the trees in the compound and spent them all. You've used them. You have no resources and you have no access to resources. Then you can't leave the compound. You can't complete the quest to unlock the compound, and you're just stuck there. This happened to me. It wasn't that exact scenario, but it was something similar. And I tried like crazy to figure out what was going on, running around, talking to everyone, seeing if I'd missed something. Eventually, all my followers just started dropping dead from hunger because I couldn't go out and collect the essential resources that I needed in this early game moment. I was 4 hours in. They all died, and then I had no cult members left, and it said, unless you get more cult members within 3 game days, then it will be game over. And I still couldn't get out of the compound, so the game file was just over. And that's not specifically a bug. You know, it's not something glitching or going wrong in that kind of way. It's a design problem, I think, in that case, because it clearly hasn't been noticed that it's possible for you to get trapped in the compound and to lose your whole save file. I don't feel that this is intentional. It's possible that it's intentional. It is possible that the management sim requires you to have the foresight to keep banks of resources. But I don't think that's the case. Like, it encourages you to build a lot. It encourages you to go on runs to get more resources. It encourages you to, for example, when all the trees are gone in your compound, you can build a lumberyard. So you don't have to wait for new trees to grow anymore. You just have followers that are churning out wood. Every time you come back from a run, you can collect all of the wood from the chests that your followers have been depositing it in. Same with stone, same with food. And so it's all about accelerating the automation of all of these resource-based tasks by putting your followers to work. And I can't believe that they would punish the player for not realizing that they need to have deep pockets with early game resources by locking them in that way. So I actually went onto the Discord of the developers to report this, and there were a lot of people in there, a lot of players all reporting the same thing. I got locked in the camp, and they all got locked in on different things. It can be any quest that locks you in. There are a lot of resource-based quests, and unless you complete them, the exit of the compound is blocked and you can't go on dungeon runs. And in the early game, before you have your infrastructure and your resource workflow up and running with all of your followers doing their tasks, you have to go out and forage the initial resources that you need to get that going. So you have to go out and find rock, you have to go out and find wood, you have to go out and find grass by chopping grass in dungeons. You come back with full pockets to build more workflow, to build more mines, etc. So this was a disaster, really. I mean, I lost 4 hours of progress. I was really bummed out. Just quit the game. I had to start again. I left it 24 hours until I had cooled off a little bit, because I was kind of pissed, actually, and then was able to start a new game. But there is a lot more bugs than that. My second run, I was able to avoid soft locks just by being aware that I need to keep a certain amount of resources, that I need to do any quests before spending all my resources on building. So I was able to get through the game the second time. But there was a lot more going wrong. There was any interaction in the game can cause the game to hang. Like, there are times when you will take confession to level up a follower, when you will re-educate a follower who you've imprisoned for dissent, when you carry out a ritual, when you give gifts to followers, that kind of thing. You can bless your followers every day to level them up. And any of those interactions can result in a hang. Like, when you interact with any of your followers in any of those ways, the camera will zoom in, so you get like a little close-up, and then it will zoom out when the interaction is over. But the camera will just get stuck zoomed in sometimes, and if that happens, you have to save, you have to quit, you have to go back to the menu screen, and you have to open the game again. And there were times when this was happening every couple minutes in the compound, so I was just constantly closing and reopening the game. There was a whole bunch of other ones too. For example, the prison in this game is like stocks. So if you send a rabbit to prison, you'll see the little rabbit head in the stocks, and it's like whining and moaning, and you have to re-educate it until it's willing to join the fold again. But those imprisoned rabbits or imprisoned followers would spawn all over the camp, and they wouldn't be in the stocks. The stocks you wouldn't be able to interact with, so you couldn't re-educate them, and they were just standing around in the stocks pose, and you can't interact with them or the prison. Farmers would be planting seeds into plots that already had seeds in them, and so there's a seed box that you can make so that your farmers can constantly be working while you're away, but they might just spend all of your seeds. that kind of thing. There were some workers that would just abandon their posts and go and do other stuff. And so I could come into like a potentially game-fatal resource shortage because some of my workers had just stopped doing their thing spontaneously. So anything you do in the game can freeze or get stuck or crash. In combat, I also had a boss whose health bar disappeared and just became invulnerable. I could keep hitting them, but they would never die, and I had to abandon the run. On a 15-minute run, when you've done really well and you've got a good build going, it's just really disheartening to lose your run. I also had wave battles where the waves would just stop spawning with the battle arena still locked, because you have to clear all of the enemies before you can move on to the next room. And if some of the enemies, for example, turn invisible or fall through the scenery into the area around the battle arena, or if a wave just doesn't spawn, then you're just stuck. You have to abandon your run. And this was going on constantly towards the late game, so I lost a lot of dungeon runs. I lost one entire save file, and I was constantly having to reopen and restart the game, sometimes at the cost of some progress. And it was just a real bummer. So this game is buggy as hell. It really is, like riddled with bugs from end to end. But it's interesting that the devs have acknowledged that. They've opened a bug reporting form that you can find on the Massive Monster Discord. And I've been like trying to politely file bugs as I find them. And Devolver and Massive Monster have tweeted out that they are aware that this is a problem. And so it seems that they have some commitment to this game because it has sold so well and it's become so popular. They have DLC planned, and I'm sure that they're just going to be working away on this one to smooth all of these bugs out. But I did want to mention it after my Twitter thread because people do like to know about these things. So if that's the kind of thing that bothers you, maybe this is a game that you're going to wait on and just keep an eye on those patches. But to run through the good things and the bad things in this game, I would say that it's very easy to play, it's very easy to like, it's all charm, it's pretty macabre and dark in a way that is really fun. It has this cute evil thing going on where you're sacrificing, brainwashing, mistreating your followers, playing pranks on them and stuff, but at the same time, it's just a bunch of cute little animals. I've seen some stuff going around online about Christian organizations being against this game because it's very, very profane. I saw it described as heretical, which I just thought was hilarious. But so there's a lot of satanic stuff, a lot of demonic stuff, a lot of summoning, sacrificing, horned gods, and all of that kind of thing. And I really enjoyed that aesthetic. I thought that it works very well with the cute line art and the beautiful color palette that the whole thing has. The sort of macabre nature of the dungeons and the grotesque nature of the bosses works really well with just these cute little animals all having a Animal Crossing camping cult together. It's just kind of fun. I haven't found an atmosphere quite like that before. So I really like the fact that it's cute, but it's also brutal. It's also funny and tongue-in-cheek, and it's also pretty evil and dark at times in a really funny way. Just all of the occult stuff is really fun. All of the rituals have really fun animations. For example, if you marry a follower, then all of your followers will form in a circle and do a fun little dance and chant and things like that. So there's lots of really fun animations. It's like a little treat, really, to get a new ritual and see all of your followers engage in a new ritual on screen. They don't last more than a couple seconds, so I never got tired of watching them, even though you'll preach a sermon every day, and I think my game was 70 in-game days, so I must have preached 70 sermons, done countless rituals, but the animation was so good that I just never got sick of watching it. I really like the contrast between Animal Crossing, Tamagotchi, follower care, and village building, whilst secretly murdering them and sacrificing them, communing with pagan gods and all of that stuff. It was all so wrong. But the contrast with the dungeon crawler I thought was really special. It does a great job at weaving the systems of the village builder together with the results of your dungeon runs. I thought the combat was fast and fluid in a way that I really wasn't expecting. Very, very snappy. Normal difficulty was perfectly manageable. I really liked that. I liked the tarot cards. It was fun to have all of these meta systems going on. So you unlock different tarot cards by buying them from shops, by finding them in chests, and once you've unlocked them, they will start to appear in your dungeon runs. So you're trying to unlock the entire deck of tarot cards, and there's lots of little sub-games like that, where you're trying to unlock all of the different decorative structures that are related to each dungeon, for example, and you can then build them back at your camp, and that includes flags, lamps, giant burning skulls, like bonfires, crystal lanterns, all of this stuff. So you get all of these cosmetic rewards as well that just let you beautify your camp. I don't particularly care for cosmetic rewards in games, as I said last week, talking about Ghost of Tsushima. So I really skipped a lot of the decorative stuff, but I guess the fact that there are hundreds of decorative objects for you to get means that some people probably like that. I liked that you're not punished for dying in your dungeon runs, really. You lose, I think, like 10% of your loot, but then you get to keep the rest. And it's really nice to not feel like you're, being raked over the coals. I think it's one of the things that I don't like about roguelikes is that losing a good run can sometimes feel like you just accomplished absolutely nothing. It's something that I don't like about Returnal. It's something that I don't like about Dead Cells, is that you can lose like a 30, 40, 50-minute run and you have nothing to show for it, and that's enough to make me quit a game entirely sometimes. Just feel like I'm pouring my time down a well, But in this game, every run you get your earnings from that run, you get your resources, you get your gold, you've unlocked new tarot cards, you've leveled up in various ways, and so every run feels meaningful, and I think that's very important to the modern roguelike genre. And the way that it plugs into the metagame, the cult management thing, the unlocking of all the different dungeons. There is also like a very basic overworld map where you can see the cult in the center, and then there is a village by the sea, there are some docks, and you just click on them and you're taken to a little scene where you'll meet a sailor or a lighthouse keeper or an old cult member who wants to teach you a game of dice. There is a dice game in this as well. So there is an overworld map that has really cute locations, and it helps to flesh out the world that you're in. I quite like the basic mythology of this world too. Overall, I would say that it's very well presented and that all of the elements are very well judged, work very well together. The combat is fast and fun. The village management is enjoyable. And the whole thing is just very nicely woven together in a way that I really admired. As for the bad things, I would say the soft locks and bugs obviously are pretty disastrous, and I hope that they get patched out. I would say that the roguelike element is pretty light. Like, the dungeons never feel incredibly different. Like, sure, you'll sometimes get different configurations in the wave battles or different combinations of enemies, that kind of thing. But honestly, from run to run, it didn't feel hugely different to me. But the runs are so short and fast that it wasn't a big deal. I would say that the weapons are pretty clearly better or worse than each other. Every time I got the glove, the claw glove at the start of a run, I rolled my eyes. It is the absolute worst weapon. I wasn't particularly fond of the daggers that don't hit very hard but are very fast. So that leaves the sword and the axe. The hammer is very, very slow, to the point at which sometimes enemies will hit you before you can swing at them, which is a real bummer. So the hammer is a bit of a drag as well. And that really leaves the axe and the sword as the most, as a heavy weapon and a light weapon. But getting the claw was always just a real kick in the balls. I think I even quit out of a run one time because I was like, I just don't want to play with this claw. The first hit that you do does hardly any damage, and you have to do a 3-hit combo. And the third hit is the one where all the damage happens. And in a very fast-moving game where you're dodging projectiles and darting between enemies, having to hit 3 times to cause any damage was just a big pain in the ass. It slowed the runs right down. So I don't really like that weapon. That was a downside for me. And I guess overall, I don't feel that it really walks the walk as a roguelike. When I lost my progress, for example, I lost those initial 4 hours, and I played through them again. Things happened in almost exactly the same way. I was getting like the axe on my first dungeon. I was getting my buildings in the same order. Even my followers had the same names and that kind of thing. So I feel like it doesn't quite walk the walk as a roguelike. It has a lot of the trappings of a roguelike, but those systems are quite light. and it's really almost more like a narrative game where you battle your way through these 4 dungeons to the end of the story. I'm not sure that I will be replaying this one, that's for sure. So if the replayability of a roguelike is something that you're really craving, I'm not sure this is the one. I will say that there are mechanics later on that encourage you to replay dungeons. They will be made more difficult. There'll be more difficult baddies, more difficult bosses, and so there is a possibility of continuing to play endlessly if that is something that interests you. I would also say some of the mechanics in the cult builder were a little underexplained towards the start. For example, if all of your followers are dissenting and you don't quite know what you've done wrong, it's possible that you've forgotten something. Like you forgot to have your sermon, you didn't feed them quite enough, and maybe you just haven't quite clocked onto all of the different aspects of the camp that you have to upkeep to have a happy camp. And it can feel like you lose control of the camp in ways that you don't quite understand. There is a little bit of a trial by fire and a learn by doing. Things can get out of control pretty fast, and before you know it, you've lost all your cult members and you're starting from zero. I've spoken to many people for whom this was a problem. I know that Carlos over on So Video Games had problems with dissent and sickness in his camp and hadn't quite nailed down why it was happening. A couple of people on the show's Discord had similar problems where they were constantly dealing with dissent, constantly dealing with sickness, constantly dealing with dying followers. And so some people seem to wrestle more than others with the systems, and I do feel that the systems are generally a little underexplained towards the start, and you have to really concentrate on every individual thing. If you miss one thing, it can come tumbling down like a house of cards. That can be a little frustrating. But that's pretty much it for the downsides. I would say that the village management side of this game, it's either going to appeal to you or it isn't. Like, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of things to juggle. It's like spinning plates. You have a mental shopping list of all the things that you're supposed to be doing. It can feel like a lot of busy work, but there was something about it all that I just really enjoyed. Loved the combat, so slick, so fast. Loved the music, loved the look of it. Loved the whole occult tone of the whole thing and the storytelling. I was really into this game. It's in the top tier of indie games that I've played this year, and that's even with the bugs. I got through it in 20 hours, and I just had a great time. I never got bored of it. I enjoyed the boss battles. It was the difficulty was forgiving enough for me. The difficulty was more really in learning about all of the interlocking systems than the combat, which was fairly manageable throughout, although you can bump it up to 2 further difficulty levels or take it down to easy if you want to. Normal was fine for me. I had a great time with this one. That's Cult of the Lamb. So that's Cult of the Lamb. I hope you enjoyed that review as much as I enjoyed the game. I'd be interested to hear from people who have played it. I'd be interested to hear from people who've experienced bugs or haven't. If you've played it on PC and found it to be pretty clean, I'd love to hear from you, just to know that that's the case. My PS5 playthrough was bug-riddled, but man, I did have fun with this one. A couple of moments of frustration when my game crashed or I lost progress, but overall, I think I will think back on this one really fondly. You can contact me on Twitter at Gaming in the Wild if you'd like to tell me about your Cult of the Lamb playthrough. I'm also on Instagram, I'm on Twitch. I've been streaming a little bit of Cult of the Lamb there, and I'm starting to stream a little more lately, although I'm pretty patchy. But if you're interested in streaming or hearing me stream, then you can follow me at twitch.tv/gaminginthewild. I will also say that I very much appreciate any reviews of the podcast on, for example, Apple Podcasts, or star ratings if you're listening on Spotify. You can now drop a rating out of 5, I think, on the podcast on the episode page. I really appreciate all of that stuff. And if you really do enjoy the show, if you're a weekly listener or a long-term listener, or you like what you heard today, you can become a patron. That's patreon.com/gaminginthewild for that. And come join that Discord community. Big thank you to all of my existing patrons, and to you if that's something that sounds interesting. I'll be back next week with another show. I've got quite a lot lined up. I've got Steve Jackson's Sorcery, Hindsight, We Are OFK, I've got the Cuphead DLC. I've got loads of code stacked up of games that I'm curious to tuck into. Not sure which one will be on the show next week, but I'll be back this time next week. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye for now.